So my name is Wes Bunn with Epic Games, and we're going to take a look at the sequencer editor inside Unreal Engine 4 today, and how it was used to create the cinematics in our latest VR game, Robo Recall. We got a lot to cover, so I'm going to try to outline really quickly what we're going to cover here in this last 30 minutes of today. First and foremost, we're going to look at the sequencer editor, and briefly how the intro scene was created in Robo Recall. Before we start to create our own sequence from scratch, we're going to be working with cameras, working with actors, doing a little bit of animation as well. So we got a lot to do here. As we go through this process, I'm going to be talking about some of the sequencer best practices, things that we do at Epic to kind of make our life a little bit easier, some tips and tricks that will hopefully make your life easier as well. And then we're also going to talk about the rendering out process. So we finished our cinematic and we want to render it out. What are the options that are available to us when we decide to do that? We're also going to be working with our media framework tools for a little bit. Our media framework tools will allow us to hook up our output media file and play it on these TVs on the level here. And then we're going to do a little bit of blueprint visual scripting so that when we start our session, the TVs will start playing our content on them. And I know blueprint's probably not what you signed up for if you're coming to a cinematics talk, but whenever I talk, I always try to stress to people to make friends with blueprints, because it's going to make your life a lot easier. You can do a lot of things in Blueprint without having to touch a single line of code. And then finally at the end, I'll stick around for a short Q&A. I know some of you guys might want to get out of here since it's the end of the day, but I'll stick around for any questions that you might have. So let's go ahead and get started. I have a build of Robo Recall up here. This is the Robo Recall editor. And to give you some quick context before we take a look at the intro, if you're not aware of Robo Recall or have not seen or played the game yet, you play as a tech repairman that's been promoted to recaller and is tasked with eliminating the defective robots in the city. In the scene that we're about to look at, we get our first look at the shift in the robot's behavior. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled program when blimps attack to bring you this emergency announcement.
So at this point you would be in VR. I guarantee you it's much more impressive when you have the headset on and you're in VR here. But what you can see is that we have full control of the camera. So it's not like a traditional cutscene, it's more like a scripted gameplay sequence that was done in sequencer. So our robots are kind of interacting with each other, all playing kind of different animations. They're looking at nothing on the TV just yet, because we're going to hook that up a little bit later in this session with our own content. We can see our robots kind of interacting. There's a newscast talking about the malfunctioning robots in the city that they're all paying attention to. You can see a drone just flew by, and these robots are kind of just standing around watching. That guy's shopping for parts there or something. Good job. This guy gets in my way. Get out of here. So what I want to do actually is pause this. We're going to come back to this in a moment to avoid any spoilers. We're going to play the whole thing back in its entirety when we hook up our content on the screen here. But what I wanted to do first was open the sequence that powered what you just saw. If I open this level sequence here, that will open up Sequencer over in the right-hand side of the screen. If you're unfamiliar with Sequencer, it's a non-linear track-based editor. So if you work with film editors like Adobe or any of those traditional film editors out there, this should look very familiar as we have several different tracks. We have a play rate, we have a fade track, those are pretty self-explanatory. But we have this shots track at the very top here, and this should look very familiar if you're used to working with clips inside of other applications. So we can drag these around like so in Sequencer. If we had multiple shots in here, we can arrange them and rearrange them as we see fit, just by dragging them around inside of Sequencer. The other thing that's really cool about Sequencer is this shot right here is its own self-contained level sequence. And what I mean by that is right now we are inside of a level sequence, but if I double click on this, we are now inside of a new level sequence, so it's kind of nested inside of another one. And this is where the real meat of this scene was created, inside of this subsequence. And this is usually something that we do at Epic. Whenever we're working with cinematics, we create a master sequence and then populate it with subsequences. That way, if we want to rearrange or move shots around in our sequence, we could just do it by dragging it around like so, versus putting it all in one sequence. The other thing that's really cool about the shots track is the ability to create what we call takes. If I right-click on our shot track here, I can go down to this option and create a new take. That's essentially a new variant of this particular shot. It will copy all that animation, cameras, whatever you have set up in that shot. It will duplicate it and allow you to make modifications to that take without altering the original. So you can feel free to experiment with new cameras, new animations, new characters, etc. And if you're unhappy with that, you can hop right up to the takes menu and switch between all of the variants that you have. And this is very useful when you have multiple shots with multiple cameras. You can play your whole scene back in one way and then change up the takes and play it back a different way right here inside of the sequencer editor. So what I want to do real quick is jump into this shot and highlight some of these tracks. There's quite a few in here, so I'm not going to cover all of them. But I did want to highlight a couple of the important ones. The one at the very top here is the camera cuts track. This is used to define the viewpoint for the cinematic. And in this case, we're using the player's perspective. A little bit later in this session, we're going to use our own camera like a traditional cutscene. But this defines the camera from which to view the cinematic from. Directly below that, we have an events track. This can be used to fire off gameplay events at runtime. And this can be any kind of event you want. It just kicks off a blueprint scripted event. And you can have it do whatever you want here when it reaches any of your keyframes here. Below that, we have an audio and an effects track that we're playing audio and triggering some effects later in the sequence. We have some ambient audio that's also playing. But I quickly wanted to select this guy here and show you him, which is kind of hanging out around the corner over there, just waiting for his part to play. If I expand him now, this is a skeletal mesh actor that we've added to Sequencer, and you can see he has some sub-tracks associated with him. Most importantly, this animation track. So we can add animations to this character and animate him through Sequencer just by defining the animation that we want him to play. So right now he's kind of hanging out, but as soon as we get to this animation, you can see he starts walking, coming around the corner, and playing his animation. And each of the guys in our scene were pretty much set up the same way. They all have their own animation tracks that we've assigned different animations to. We can also add audio to them if we want. But that's pretty much how this scene was set up. All of our actors were added to Sequencer, and then we can control them through Sequencer. So now that we have an idea of what Sequencer is, what I want to do now is create our own sequence. So what I'll do is hop to a different map for this. I already have it up, so I'm going to kind of just pop that up so you don't have to wait for me to load it. And what we have here is one of our levels from Robo Recall. It's kind of like a city environment. It's also the backdrop for where our newscast takes place, where all the robots are going crazy in the city. If I hit the G key, I can hide all these editor icons so it looks kind of like that. And if I open the sequence, which powers our newscast, if I double click on this, you can see our sequencer editor looks a little bit different than it did before. We don't have any additional tracks, we just have a shot track, to which I can lock it to, so our viewport is locked to that shots track. And now what we have is a more traditional cutscene. We have some camera movement, some different shots in here, like so as I'm scrubbing through. You can see our robots are going crazy in the city here. And one of the other things that we do as a best practice whenever we're working with master tracks like this here, usually we stagger our shots out like so. We could put all of our shots up on one track like so, but then it's kind of hard to see where the break in all of your shots are. So typically this is what we do. We kind of stagger it out just so you can see the distinctive breaks in your shots. And again, we can also move these shots around because they're self-contained level sequences and arrange them as we see fit. So what I want to do is replace one of these shots with our own shot. I'm thinking we're going to do this shot right here, actually. We're going to replace this with our own shot. So if I zoom in and I take the shot here and I right-click on it and I go to Properties, I can deactivate it so it's no longer active. And what I can do is kind of move this down to give us a little bit more room to create our own shot in here. Sequencer operates on a top-down evaluation. And by that I mean it's going to evaluate the topmost track and work its way down. So these are kind of stacked on top of each other, but if I scrub through, it's only going to play the top one until it gets to the next one, like so. And I could shift this back and forth as I see fit. But I think this is good. This is what we'll do here. So I'm going to insert a shot in here so we can create our own sequence. And to do that, I can come to the shots track here, click this button, and insert a shot. And when I do, it's going to ask for a save name, location, all of that. I'm just going to use the default and save it, like so. So there's our empty shot. And I can move it over and stretch it out to give us a little bit more room to play with. My mouse sensitivity, there we go, something like that. Trying to find, let's move it a little bit more. I'm looking for this red marker there, so I kind of wanted to highlight this real quick. So this red marker here indicates where I am inside of my subscene. So right now it's set to 150 frames, but on the master level, we're actually going a little bit past that. So we could use the 150 frames, or we can make adjustments to this. It's just a way to visualize what's going on in all of your sequences. And you can see that from the top level here as well. So our subscene's only set up to 150 frames. Anything past that is not going to get evaluated here. So we'll use the 150 frames for our shot, and just move that over. And if I double click on this now, we're set up to use 150 frames, and it's completely empty. So we're going to create our own shot here. Some other quick tips. If you hit the up arrow on your keyboard, that will take you back to frame 0 to start it over. You can hit down arrow to play, and the left and right keys will step through on a frame by frame basis. So now that we have this empty sequencer here, what we're going to do is find a spot inside of our level here where we want to shoot our cinematic. And I'm thinking we're going to do something over here. We're going to have some guys running down the street, jump over this barricade. Some guys are going to chase him. He's going to stop and pop off some shots at him. I think that'll be a good shot, and it's in line with the rest of our cinematic. So the first thing that we're going to need is a camera for our sequence. And we could do that one of two ways. We could come to the modes panel. We could come down to our cinematic section. And we also have the ability to add rigs and rails for you filmmakers out there and know what those are. But we also have this camera actor, which we could drag into the level. We can then add it to sequencer. But if you recall, we need a camera cuts track to tell us what our viewpoint is, so we need to add that. Or we could click this button right here, and it will do all of that for us in one step. So if I click this, it'll create the camera cuts track for us and create a camera and associate that camera with our camera cuts track. So we're ready to go. We're ready to start filming our shot. We're also put into pilot mode, which allows us to kind of fine tune where we want to frame up our shot, which I think right here is fine. Typically before I add a camera, I'm flying around the viewport to kind of frame up and see how I want to shoot it. And I think this is going to be fine, so we're going to do that. The last thing that I want to do to this is because it's kind of like a newscast, I want to get a little bit of camera movement, so kind of like a handheld style camera movement. And we can do that from the camera track here. If we go to the track button and we come down to camera animation or camera shake, we can select one of these. You can also create your own camera animation data from Max or Maya, bring that into Unreal. We're also looking at exposing these as part of our engine content so that you have something to kind of play with, but you can also import your own if you feel so inclined to do that. So I'm going to choose this one here and see what this looks like. If I scrub through it, we get a little bit of movement there, which is what we want. So it looks like a handheld shaky cam. And we'll do a little bit more work to this camera here in a moment just to kind of punctuate our scene. But for now, we need some actors in our scene because we're just kind of filming nothing. So I'm going to unlock our camera so we can control our viewport here. And I'm going to come down to the content browser and just drag some guys into the level like so. We'll take this guy in. He'll be the bad guy for our little cinematic here. So we have these guys inside of our level. How do we get them to sequencer and start working with them in sequencer? Well, sequencer is very smart. It knows what you have selected in the level. So if I hold control and select all of these guys, and I come over to sequencer, click the add button, and under add actor to sequencer, I can add all three of those guys to sequencer and then control them through sequencer. So anything that's in your level, you can add to sequencer and control it. So I'm going to go ahead and add all three of those guys, and when we do, they each get their own transform and animation tracks. So let's go ahead and start animating our guys here. I'm going to select this guy, and he's selected in sequencer. We want to give him an animation. We come to the animation track, click this button, and search for the animation that we want to apply. Now in this case, we're going to look for a run and jump animation, and we have quite a few here. Looks like we have some variants here, so I'm going to go ahead and try this one here, this run to jump version 1, like so. And let's see what it looks like if I scrub through my scene. He's running the wrong way, so we're going to have to fix that. So we can come to the viewport, and we could hit E to go into rotation mode. Just grab that arc, rotate him around 180 degrees like so. You can press W to go into translation mode and just kind of move him over so that he's jumping over that barricade. So if I scrub through now, move him back forward a little bit more. This guy's not a long jumper. I could spend some more time fine-tuning this, but I think that will be good, except there's one thing that's going to bug me. That back leg, if you take a look at it, it's kind of clipping into the barricade there, and we're going to be good cinematic designers. We're going to fix this. Now, you could do this a couple different ways. You could use the transform track and pop that guy up and add a keyframe, move him over, and then pop him back down. Or with the power of Unreal, you can edit this animation directly inside the editor. So you don't have to go out to Max and make those changes, bring them back in, or Maya if that's your favorite. We can make those changes right here in the editor. So I'll show you how you can do that. If we go to the animation track, right click on it and go to properties, we can browse to that animation. Here it is in the content browser. If I double click, it'll open it up. So let me bring it over here so you guys can see it on this side. And that animation is playing back now. You can see our guy doing his jump there. I'm going to pause it and kind of scrub it back a little bit. So that back leg is just dragging behind a little bit. So we're going to fix that inside of our animation tools here. So I'll add a keyframe for his starting position, and then when he finishes his jump, I'll add another keyframe. But then I'm going to pop back a little bit, move that leg up just a little bit, and add a keyframe for that. So let's go ahead and select his knee there, something like that, calf, I guess, that'll work. So I'm going to add a key for that by clicking this button here from the toolbar. I'm going to scrub forward a little bit so he gets over like that. I'll add another keyframe. Then I'm going to backtrack a little bit to somewhere in here, somewhere in the middle, something like that. I'm going to come in here and just pop that leg up, making sure he clears it, adding a keyframe. So now that when we scrub through, that back leg comes way up and should clear it. So if I apply these changes now, and I close this out, and I come back to sequencer, if I scrub through, that back leg should get over. We could move him forward a little bit more to make sure, or make some more adjustments to it, but it's much better than it was before. So he clears the barricade. Let's go ahead and give some animation to our other guy here. And let's make sure that we're at frame 0 by hitting the up arrow. And let's go down to our animation track. Let's use a run jump animation for him. And we'll use the version 2 because I think it's a little bit different, so we'll go ahead and do that. And if I scrub through now, he's running the opposite way. So we got to fix that. So again, we're going to press the E key to go into rotation mode and rotate him around 180 degrees. So. And let's scrub through and see what that looks like. Looks like he needs to come back a little bit, so I'm going to hit W, pop him back. This guy was a long jumper. He easily cleared that. So we don't need to make any animation changes to him. I think he's good. We need to do a little bit more animation work for this guy here because he's just standing there so the other guys will get away, so we need to fix that. First thing I'll do is hit E and rotate him so he's facing the right direction. And for this guy, we're going to do something a little bit different. Our previous two guys, we were using motion capture data, which had root motion translation built into the animation. Oftentimes, when you're working with animations, you may have animations that don't have built-in translation, and how you would get around that inside of Sequencer. I'll show you a quick way you could do that. So if I go back to the beginning of our cinematic here, and I select our guy, I go to our animation track. Let's use a run forward. So. You can see if I scrub through, our guy does not have translation built in. He's just running in place. Not only that, his animation is very short. So we can loop this animation in Sequencer just by dragging and stretching that out like so. So now he's running in place, so the guys are going to get away, so we'll fix that. And to do that, we're going to use our transform track. So we're going to use his position in world space and add keyframes to physically move him in the level. So to do that, what we can do is add a keyframe for his current transform position. So by clicking that button there, so we've added that key. And if I scrub forward a little bit, and I push our guy forward a little bit, I could come in and click this button to add another key for his new transform position. But we also have the ability to press the S key, and that will also add a key for transform. So it's a quick shortcut for adding a transform key. So now our guy is kind of running down the street a little bit. And there might be a little bit of foot sliding. You might have to do a little bit of manipulation to get this to look quite right. You could slide the transform key so he arrives either a little bit earlier or a little bit sooner, like so. Do something like this. Makes it a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. So I think that's good for now. We'll do something like this. And what we want to do now is, now that he's reached his end position, we want him to stop and start firing his weapon at our two other guys. So we're going to give him another animation. And I'm going to come over to the character here, go to the track, and under animation, I'm going to search for a idle aim shoot. So now we have this idle aim shoot. I'm going to go ahead and loop that so he fires off a couple shots. And if I scrub through now, our character is kind of sliding around on the ground there. He's playing both animations at once, actually. This is something that we introduced in version 4.15, which we just released a couple weeks ago. If I expand the animation tracks, we have these weight properties, and they're both set to 1.0, so they're playing both animations at the same time here. And what we want to do is kind of fade in between. We want to kind of crossfade between those two animations, and we can do that by adding keyframes for this property. So what I'll do to make this work here is I'll come over and I'll change our idle aim shoot to not be 1. We'll change that to 0, and we'll add a keyframe for it. And for our run forward, we'll leave that as 1.0, so I'll add a keyframe for that, so he should be in the run pose. Then what we could do is kind of scrub forward a little bit and just reverse those. So set this to 0, hitting enter to add a key, and setting this to 1.0, hitting enter to add a key. So now what we get is our character kind of goes from a run into that pose and starts firing. And we can fine tune this a little bit more by moving this transform key over just a little bit more. So he kind of shifts into position like so. Now our character is kind of just pointing at our guys because they got away, doesn't have a weapon, so we need to give him a weapon real quick. You could add that weapon via sequencer. This is usually a case for if you have cinematics where you want characters to kind of pick up and drop things in your cinematic. But we're going to add it a different way here in a moment. Because there's one more thing that I want to do to our camera. If we lock our camera here, I kind of want to push the camera in just to kind of punctuate our scene a little bit. Now we could use our transform track like we just did a moment ago, moving the camera. But we also have this focal length property, which we can zoom in using that track. So I'll add that to kind of finish off our scene here. We'll use the default 35 length there. I'll add a keyframe for it, scrub forward a little bit, adjust that to kind of push in just a little bit. I could have moved my guy over a little bit more, but I think that's good. So we've added a key, so what we get is a little bit of camera movement and shake. Our guys are running and jumping over, kind of punch in like so. Last thing that we need to do is give our guy that weapon because he still doesn't have a weapon in his hand. So let's go ahead and do that. So to do that, what I'll do is, let's go ahead and make sure we have our guy selected. I'm going to copy his name real quick, come down to the content browser, take our pistol, drag it into the level like so. Going to rename this now to our character's name and just add gun to the end. So that when I come to the world outliner and I select our character, that gun is right there underneath him. To attach things, you can come to the world outliner and just drag and drop them on top of whatever you want to attach them to. So in this case, we're attaching it to our character. So when I release this, my mouse button, it's going to ask us where do you want to attach this. Now our character, we can attach this to any bone we want on our character, but our character has some weapon bones, which are some bones in his hands for carrying weapons, obviously, appropriately named. So I'm going to attach it to his weapon L there, his left hand. You can see it pops into his hand there. So now if I scrub through, our guy's kind of holding it upside down there, kind of shooting gangster style or sideways, or you can create a new take to have that if you want in your scene, but we'll fix it for the purposes of this demo. I'll fix it. Maybe in another demo I'll leave it. And I'll rotate that around by hitting the E key and then the W key for transform or translation like so. And we could fine tune it some more, but from this distance, I think that's going to be just fine. So our scene's set up. We're good to go. Everything's done. I would also add some particle effects on the gun, but I think we're good. At this point, what we'd want to do is render the whole sequence out so that we can share it with our friends or do whatever we want with our media. To do that, we would come to this clapboard icon here to bring up our render movie settings. And you can see we have a bunch of different options in here for how we want to render this out. We can render it out as a video sequence or an image sequence. We can change the frame rate or resolution. For you cinematics folks out there, we can apply burn-ins to this. So if you're looking at dailies and you want to have time code information or shot name, you can add those or your custom burn-ins if you'd like as well. We also have the ability to write out edit decision lists for you film people out there. You can use that in your post-production process as well. Now I'm not actually going to capture this out because we got about 7 minutes left in today's session. So what I'm going to do is close this out because I've already rendered it out to save us that time. I'm going to hop back over to my other project real quick. And what I'll do is bring in our rendered clip that we've captured through the magic of GDC. And if I come over here and I go to my folder, here's our clip that we've rendered out. And I can drag and drop that in like so. And when we do that, it's going to create a new asset for us. It's going to create this file media source asset. And this is part of our media framework tools. And media framework in Unreal is a way that you can work with, as the name suggests, media inside the engine. That media can be packaged with your project, can be local on your local machine, or it can be streamed in via URL as well. We're going to use a local copy here. To actually play this, though, we're going to need a media player asset. And to create that, we can right-click, or we can go to the Add button over here. But we can right-click and go to Media, and select Media Player. And when we do, it's going to ask us if we want to associate audio and video with this, which we do. So I'm going to check both of those and click OK. It's going to ask for a name, which we'll just call our player, like so. And it's created those two assets for us. The next thing that we want to do is, if we come to our TV here, and we look in the details panel, you can see we have some materials applied to our TV. We have an element 0 and element 1. These represent the inner portion and the outer portion of our TV. So we need to create a material to apply to element 0, which is the inner portion of our TV. So the quickest way to create a material is to come to our texture here, right-click on it, and create a material. And that's it, we're done. We don't have to go into the material editor because we know that this is a media texture, so it's done everything for us. All we need to do now is select all of our TVs in the level, make sure I have them all selected, and take our material, drag and drop that on top of element 0, which is the inner portion of the TV. So our material is set up on our TV. The last thing that we need to do is a little bit of blueprint scripting so that when we start the game, the media starts playing. For those of you that aren't aware, Blueprint is our visual scripting language inside Unreal Engine 4. And I'm going to do this inside the level blueprint, which is just a unique blueprint per map. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to pop this over on this side like so. And what we need is a reference to our media player asset. So I'm going to create a variable for that reference, and I'll call it our player, like so, just to keep our naming consistent. We're going to have to change the type because a Boolean variable is not going to help us. We're going to need a media player. So a media player reference, a reference to our media player. If I compile, it's going to say, well, what media player are you talking about? Right now, I don't know what you're talking about. But if I click this drop down, I can then specify to use our player, which is what we want. So if I compile one more time, and I hold Control and drag this into the graph, we now have a reference to our media player asset. So what we want to do is, at the beginning of play, when we start our game, we want to open this asset so that it can start playing. So if I right-click and I search for Begin Play, we have this node called the Event Begin Play, which is fired at the start of your game. We can then drag off of this and say, Open our source. So. And when we connect this to that, that will get called. And you can see it says target is a media player. And the last thing that we need to do is, it's saying what media source do we want? Well, we're talking about this one here that we imported. So we can click this drop down, or since we have it selected in the content browser, we can click this arrow to select it as well. And if we compile one more time, and we play in the editor, fingers crossed, everything should work. There we go. So it's playing on the TVs now. Our content is playing.
An emergency.
It's been doctored up a little bit, just to give it a little bit more presentation value. But let's watch the entire sequence here play out now. And again, if you have a chance, if you didn't get a chance to play it today, play Robo Recall. It's a lot of fun, and this is much cooler in VR.
I trust them.
There is nothing to fear. The allegations that our new TAL Series 9 are malfunctioning have not been verified by any reputable source.
Hey, I'm a
So there's our sequence right there. All of this was done in Sequencer. We've rendered the movie out, brought it back in as an MP4, and used our media framework to hook it up to the TV.
You are likely almost entirely safe. We stake our reputation on it.
Excuse me.
Well, there you have it. Hold on a moment. Unconfirmed sources are telling us that the malfunction may be spreading to TAL Night in other parts of the city. In response, RoboReady may be issuing a citywide recall. Until the recallers have the situation under control, the one thing you absolutely must do.
So that is the intro cinematic to Robo Recall, which was all done inside of Sequencer. And really quickly before we get out of here, I'm going to recap what we covered here today. If I can get my toolbar back, that would help. Somebody locked it. There we go. So recapping really quickly what we covered. We took a look at the Sequencer editor and how the intro scene was constructed. We created our own sequence from scratch. We added cameras, did animation, and we talked about shots and takes and how those are so valuable. We talked about some of the best practices, things that we do at Epic, various shortcuts that we use. We talked about the rendering process, didn't actually render it out, but we talked about the options that are available to you during that process. We used our media framework tools to get our content playing on the TVs in our level. And then we did some blueprint visual scripting to actually have it play when we started our game. So we covered quite a bit here. All of this stuff is covered in our official documentation as well, if you'd like to learn more about Sequencer. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. I know it's the end of the day, so go ahead and get out of here and enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you guys.